everyone, Desiree here, and I'm here with another Spellbinders new collection, but this is by somebody else that we know, Vicky P, because I never attempt her last name. And as you can see, it is called Paint Your World. She has the sentiments for Paint Your World. She has a painter's palette. She has butterflies and a brush that you can make. And then she also has just the individual brush, and that is called the Artful brush. So since this is her collections, what I always think about when I think of her designs and look forward to on her channel are those art journals. So I guess kind of in the honor or essence of this is what we're going to create. So I've grabbed my panel. This is a 7.5 by 7.5 inch panel. It is mixed media paper, and I'm going around the edge with a distress paint in black soot. I then have another panel. It is a watercolor panel, watercolor paper, and it's the Canson XL watercolor paper, and I've cut that to be 8 by 8. Wasn't quite sure what size this was going to be. I'm going to spray the front of this panel, and I'm also going to spray the back of the panel. Very liberal with the water. What's going to happen by me doing that, I'm working on my glass surface, and as I put down my acrylic paints, this is actually sticking to this glass mat. And as you can see, it's not warping because I've wetted it. Yeah, I've sprayed water to the front and the back of this panel. It will stop the warping. Whenever I use my acrylic paints, I do like to have water down and keep them very wet as I'm going back and forth when I'm looking to create this streak type effect. When I'm looking for a mottled, a cloudy effect, I will use a baby wipe. I will put down the colors like this, and then I'll come in with that baby wipe. You can see when I pried it up with a pokey tool, because you have to do that. I mean, it's stuck down there. It stayed flat. And that's because it is wet on both sides. When I dry this, I dry it so air can go on both sides. There's something that I have, like files that are spread across, that I can just lay that on. And there's air that can travel through. Very little warping goes on. I grabbed my vintage photo and some ground espresso, and this is another piece of mixed media cardstock. I'm going to spray this with water, and I'm going to ink smush. Now, I'm not using a silicone mat. I am using my glass surface, so I'm going to get a different effect, and that's okay. I'm looking for that effect. I don't want the other type where you use a silicone and it beads up. That's my go-to. But this is supposed to look like a wood palette. At least that's what I'm going for. I used my heat gun to dry this, just to speed up the process, because I am extremely impatient. I'm just saying, just extremely. This is going to be my focal point. I run that through my die cutting machine. This is the panel. You can see very little warping. That's exactly how it looked when it dried, just around the corners. I'm going to place this on top of my panel there just to make sure that I have it cut to the size that I'm looking for. I just want this to sit on top of that area that's open. I want to leave the holes on the side open. Now, I could have cut it so that they were covered, and I would have just repunched them. Not a problem. I'm coming in with my script stamp, and I'm stamping on the background. I'm using my potting soil ink archival to go along the back. And then I'm going to come in with my Harlequin stencil. Now, I made a boo-boo here. Yeah. So I'm using the crackle paste, which is what I wanted to use. But I used the icicle. So the icicle is clear, which is cool. Awesome effect. But I should have used the one that had color to it, you know, like the white, and then we would have been able to see this. But we keep going, and that's okay. You know, I just have the clear crackles in the background, and they are there. I'm going to go around the edge with this, with my vintage photo. Oh, and I used my decal edge trimmer to cut this. You could just tear the edges if you want. you'll get a similar effect. I'm now going to come in with a stamp along the edge in my black archival ink, and this is the stamp set by Stampers Anonymous called Etc. And again, using the principles that she has taught us, using some of the products that she has used, but just those techniques of what she has shown us that I am using, because I use the black because my frame around the side of it is black, so that will then connect into that. Because there was a lot of water going on this panel, I'm going to use my 2-inch double-sided film tape from Uline. It is extremely strong, and once I put this onto that black panel, it will flatten itself right out, and there won't be any warping, which is awesome. I also used another stamp set from the Etc. set in the black archival ink, again, just to pull that through. All of the cardstock that I'm using, except for the mixed media, are scraps from either backgrounds that I had made through ink smushing or watercoloring, or just some small snippets of cardstock. So I was able to find that piece of corrugated cardstock. In that, I inked around it with some vintage photo, and I'm placing my paint blobs. Now, I also want to make sure that I'm not putting all of my ink blobs all the way around, because this is going to be coming up from underneath that piece of corrugated paper. So I need to make sure that when they're set down, that they're not all covered. I want that rainbow to be seen. I also die cut the ink blocks, or blobs, not blocks, blobs, out of white cardstock so that I could get this little highlight piece. Could you go through it with a gel pen? Absolutely. I didn't want to. If the die does it, why not? Let's do some inlay die cutting here and just fill that right in. I've got an awesome highlight to that piece. And I'm just using it's actually a nail gem picker upper thingy to put those pieces in place. I cut the paint tube out of some gold shimmer cardstock, and I'm layering up those pieces. And then I did cut the center from a piece of scrap ink smushed panel from blue. I'm now going to work on the brush. So just used a little bit of vintage photo around that. And what's great is when you die cut the brush, there is a wood embossed design into that, which I think is really cool. Used a scrap piece of iridescent cardstock for the brush band. And I'm just gluing that in place so that it doesn't move. I'm going to come in with some ground espresso to go around the palette. I chose the ground espresso. I was going to go with the vintage photo, but I think the vintage photo would have been too close. So I really wanted that to just have that frame, that inked frame around it. So I just went with a darker color. I'm going to be coming in with some matte medium. This is by Deco Art, and I'm going to cover the palette and the brush. I'm also going to make sure I'm moving extremely quickly. My brush had no water on it, so I did not use the brush that I used when I painted with the black paint, or the background that you see up there. I am using a dry paintbrush. Remember, I used Distress inks on this. So if my brush was wet, it would have moved those paints because they are water reactive. Because the brush was dry and didn't overwork on some of the colors, really didn't have time for them to move. I also kept my finger on top of the brush band so that I didn't go over that. I didn't want to lose the luster from the iridescent. I'm using my glue, and I'm going to set this in place, making sure that the brush does go off the side for that. When I place the paint tube, it's going to be propped up using some double-sided foam squares. So the sentiment that I chose is create something every day. I thought it was fitting. There was a lot of sentiments that I think were excellent choices, but I thought create something every day was perfect, because we should. We should always, remember, always be creative. Absolutely. And we can do that every day. Doesn't always have to deal with paper. Using my double-sided foam squares, like I said before, and I'm going to prop this up and just have this come off the palette and over onto the corrugated. I have 3 butterflies that I die cut, and you can see that the colors are ranging and coming from that center of the paint tube that I had, because these are the colors that I used for that ink smushed panel. I just made sure that I cut my butterflies from the different areas, and I'm just going to set them coming off of this palette. I'm then going to set the centers of the butterflies. So now we're going to continue. So we've done our stamping for our background and along the edge. We're going to come in with our pit pens and go around. So this is why we covered our piece with matte medium. We had to take this cardstock and make it a non-porous surface. So by doing that, we are able to use the pit pens. Make sure your matte medium is dry, because if not, it gets on the brush tip, it will ruin that brush. You will not be able to save it. What's inside these pit brush pens are India ink, or is India ink. So it's, when it dries, it's permanent. But it does take a little bit on a non-porous surface to dry, which I was really thrilled with the glitter, or with the shimmer cardstock. It took that absolutely awesome. So something that she's always shown us. And of course, splatters. Gotta have splatters. Now, I will say that she controls hers. Now, I need to bring in that mini snowstorm here, because we just came off of one. Or matter of fact, I did this during the storm that hit us over the weekend. On the 12th, because I figured, okay, if I keep doing this, I won't watch the storm and I won't lose my power. So we're going to come in with our white gel pen just to highlight our areas. Of course, this one dies as I'm using it, because it was on its last leg. Pulled in another one just to continue, and I'm going to scratch along that corrugated cardstock just to make sure that stands up just a little bit as well. There's so many other techniques that she shows. These were just the ones that I could remember when it comes to doing an art journal. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you're interested in seeing her entire collection, designed with Spellbinders, please, the links will be down below. Make sure you check them out. If you have any questions, make sure you leave those down below as well, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you haven't yet, make sure you bump that subscribe button, make sure you hit that thumbs up, and don't forget the bell. Hopefully you will be notified. But I'm hearing sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It's okay. Just know I do post here regularly. Remember what's most important for me. Enjoy the process. Have fun with it while you're creating your art. And always be creative, guys. And I'll talk to you in the next one. Take care.